Welcome to the Practice of Behavior Analysis podcast, a platform for connection, dissemination, and collaboration.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chicago School ABA newsletter video podcast. Today, we're doing something a little bit different than we had in the last two episodes, where Gracia and I are going to be talking about some of the podcasts in our field, just a little bit about what they're about, some of the episodes we've liked, who they're led by, and just our brief take on them. And we hope that if you're new to the field or simply looking for some other ways to, learn more about ABA, this will be a little bit of an inspiration to know where to look and what to listen to. So a fun fact, I did a little poll on Instagram just to see what others in the field are listening to. So you'll see, I'll put it up here. I asked folks in ABA if they listen to podcasts and if they listen to them regularly. Out of the people that responded, 73% said yes, and 27% said no. So quite a few people are listening to podcasts on a regular basis. I then asked how often they listen to these podcasts, and most people said around 1 to 2 times per week. Only one person responded 5 to 7 times per week, and then one person responded 0, that they don't have time. So just a fun little fact.
That must be a grad student.
And then I also asked one more question, and you'll see that pop up here as well. Just asking what podcast people are listening to. And some of the answers I got were Behavioral Observations podcast, which I feel like it's a pretty popular one that has been around for quite a while. Behavior, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, I assume.
Bitches. I don't know either. That's one of the ones that I'm covering. So
okay.
Well, I guess it's your name.
That's true. The Autism Helper, ABA Inside Track, Behavior Bitches again, and then the Supervisor Soapbox from the LEAP Institute, which I had never heard about. Have you heard of this one?
No, I haven't.
So this one's pretty interesting. This isn't one that I really knew about until I read about it after someone responded with that. And they are a nonprofit organization that focuses on helping people that are new to the field to be able to access supervision, CEUs, maybe pay for the certification process. So we will leave a link with information below, but it sounded like a really great opportunity for people maybe that are having trouble accessing more affordable supervision. So their plan is to reduce or remove financial barriers that hinder marginalized groups seeking to enter the field of behavior analysis. So they help by offering scholarships for supervision, mentorship, test fees, and other financial fees. So I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm surprised I didn't know more about this before, because it sounds like a fantastic company that I would like to learn more about. So jumping into the podcast that we'll be discussing, Behavioral Observation Podcast is the first one that I have on my list. It was one of the first ones that I ever listened to in the field. I remember I came across it because it was when I was studying for the BC ABA exam, I believe. And I just wanted some more, like a better way to listen to information that wasn't just sitting in front of my Cooper book or my computer reading information. So I started listening to podcasts, and Matt Zikoria is the one who runs it. And he does a really good job at just kind of having conversations with people in the field, bringing a lot of different topics, which is great because if you, if you work in a clinic setting, it's most likely that those are the topics that you are covering, and that's about it because you're surrounded with clinical topics. But listening to podcasts is a great way to kind of expand your knowledge to things that may be outside of your scope of practice. I know at least that was my experience. I got to listen to a lot of things that I hadn't been exposed to through my clinical work. So he lists on his website the 5 most downloaded episodes. And I thought it was funny because 3 of the 5 was Dr. Greg Hanley, which isn't surprising, But this is like, that's interesting because he has lots of episodes on there. So I'll also put up here all the ones that have been downloaded, but one of them is Get Your Act Together with Jonathan Tarbox, which is one of my favorite episodes. Anytime I see anything by Dr. Stephen Hayes or Jonathan Tarbox or anything surrounding ACT, I jump on it because it's one of my topics of interest. And then if I had to pick one episode that I really loved from him, he interviewed Gianna Biscontini. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But this was one of the first times I heard mindfulness and meditation be spoken about within the scope of behavior analysis. And this was a few years ago. And it's just a really great episode to listen to why we should be including these topics into behavior analysis. So if you're interested in those topics, that's a great one to listen to. And that's session 53. And that's all I have right now for behavioral observations. I'm sure there's so much more great things to say about it, but that's the quick rundown.
Yeah, he's had so many like great interviews. For me, it's hard to pick a top one. I really enjoy listening to Dr. Kim Behrens, and after I listened to her episode, I actually found their Fit Learning Lab here in New York, and I signed up for their internship.
Nice.
So I was able to do a year of precision teaching and direct instruction, and I got some training from Dr. Behrens directly, her and her husband Nick Behrens. So that was pretty cool experience. And if it wasn't for that episode and listening to that episode, I probably wouldn't have come across that experience. So
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, it's great. So the next podcast that we're going to cover is Why We Do What We Do. And this one is co-hosted by Dr. Scott Abraham Miller, Ryan O'Donnell, who a lot of people are familiar with, and Dr. Shane Spike. And they basically talk about how psychology applies to different topics in business, education, habit reversal. They go a little bit in the history of the field of psychology, and they have guest speakers from time to time. You can listen to them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and the SoundCloud. I believe there are a few other platforms, but those are like the big ones that I can think of from the top of my head. They do weekly uploads on Wednesdays, and they actually just had like their 200th episode recorded, which is a pretty great accomplishment. On the personal note, they were one of the first podcasts that I listened to, along with Matt Sikoria. So I think it was back in 2017 when they started, and I learned about them through Ryan O'Donnell. He had done the Next Generation Revolution Summit in Edison, New Jersey. I believe that was the second conference that he had kind of led in the Next Gen Revolution Summit. So I met Ryan there, and I started following him on social media and learning about the podcast, what we do, and the many projects that he's been involved ever since, which is incredible how involved he is with so many things. It's admiring. Which brings me to the next podcast that I want to talk about is the Controversial Exchange. Ryan O'Donnell is one of the co-hosts, along with Dimitri Makridis. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I'm not. And Danielle Watson. So Dimitri and Danielle are actually TCS students. They're both third-year PhD students in our program. I met them both in my first residency. It was pre-COVID when we had in-person residency. I was assigned to both of their poster presentations, and they are also my lab mates. So we're all in Dr. Califoot's lab. We meet on Tuesday nights, and so shout out to Dr. Califoot's lab. And it's been very interesting to listen to both Danielle and Dimitri within the academic setting versus controversial exchange podcast. So they're very knowledgeable. They know their stuff. Very, very fun to listen to. The podcast started in 2019, so they haven't been around for too long, but they do have a good amount of episodes. They've also had guest speakers, experts within our field. They cover topics within our field, topics that are controversial, that are not talked about, that are talked about behind closed doors. There's a couple of very interesting episodes that I really enjoyed. They call them reaction episodes. One of them was a reaction to Skinner's 1990 APA speech, and the other one was a reaction to Murray Sidman's Squab speech. And they basically just played the speech, and they made pauses throughout to just kind of make commentaries, discuss, etc. So those were pretty fun. They were different. I enjoyed those very much. And you can listen to them on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify. Those are like the main platforms.
Just a fun fact I feel like I need to throw in here, since most of our audience is from the Chicago School. When I want to say it was maybe EAB that I took, you have to read this or listen to the AP speech by Skinner. And this was such a great episode to listen to alongside with the material that was shared with the school, because you got to listen to another perspective as well. And I don't know, it was just kind of cool. I don't know if you did the same when you were taking the class, and I can't remember if it's EAB.
It was radical behaviorism. I took that last term, and that's, yeah, and we did watch the video. So yeah, I agree with you.
Didn't throw in here was because I guess it's not really a podcast, but the Daily BA by Ryan O'Donnell. He does covers a lot of really cool content as well. And even though it's more like video based, I think it's also a fun one to explore if you're interested in learning more about different perspectives in the field. Well, the next one I'm going to talk about is the culture of self-care. And if you haven't already seen a trend with what I talk about, I like self-care and mindfulness and all these well-being topics within the field. This one is led by Dr. Fiorilli, or Ashley Fiorilli, who is very, very kind and knowledgeable in everything ABA, particularly in the area of ACT and mindfulness. And I actually had the opportunity to do a practicum with her last year on ABA and wellness. So how you can incorporate different ABA interventions through kind of that wellness lens and vice versa. And I learned a lot from her teachings and strategies. So this is naturally why I really liked her podcast, because she discusses self-care within our field. And I feel like that is a incredibly important topic to discuss always, but I feel like particularly during this time with COVID and the pandemic and all the added stress that we've gone through, it's even more important. So she does a new episode every 3 weeks. It is a newer podcast, so there's not that many episodes out yet. But the whole premise of this is that she interviews different people within the field and discusses burnout. So how have they dealt with burnout? What are they doing in the self-care area? And maybe just listening to other people's perspectives in this will help us better our self-care and maybe keep a lookout for burnout a little bit more, so that we don't end up burning out within what we do. So just a fun little podcast to learn about.
Yeah, that's a new one to me, so I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So the next podcast we want to talk about is ABA Inside Track. The co-hosts are Robert Perry, Diana Perry, and Jackie McDonald. They review, summarize, and discuss behavior analytic journal articles. So it's a podcast about ABA and the research that fuels our field. It's a source of continuum education credit for BCBAs and BCBADs. I use their podcast with my supervisees in training, BCBAs that were not BCBAs, but they were BCBAs in training that were eventually sit for the exam. So I had them read an article or I created more of like a curriculum based on what ABA Insight track episodes were, so that we had like the article and the episode, and my supervisees had the option to read or listen to the podcast or do both, but they have sort of like that flexibility. And in addition to that, we in our like group supervision meetings, we will all as a group discuss the articles and the episode and whatnot. So very, very helpful for those studying, for those that just kind of need something else and just reading an article. Sometimes I have to read an article 1 or 2 times, and I will go and listen to a podcast where they talk about that article, and it just makes a little more sense to me. I need like multiple mediums, so this is one of those podcasts that did help me as well when I was struggling with articles, and they would just kind of break those down. Love it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that, of using that kind of as a guide for supervisees, like just to know topics.
And I still have the curriculum, so I can definitely share, like send it to you, or just kind of broke everything like topic, episodes, and the articles that were involved. Yeah,
that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that leads nicely into the next one, which is Inside the BACB podcast, which is also relatively new. Have you listened to it yet?
No, not yet.
I actually have only, full disclosure, listened to a full episode of this one. I do think it's a great resource for BCBAs, BCABAs, people that are RBTs that are just maybe now getting into the field, because it is a little more technical. I went through the episodes just to see what exactly it covers, and it's just more about what the BACB is about: certification process, handbook reviews, history of ethics. The one I listened to today was they were interviewing Dr. Sellers on the new ethical code, which was really great because she went through each of the changes and kind of compared to the old or to the current ethical code and said, okay, this is the same, but this is different, and gave a little bit of her take as to why it may be better or why it's different. And this is important to note because it goes into effect January 1st of next year, of 2022. So just a really great way to listen to all the changes and all the cool stuff that the BACB is doing. And again, it's also available in major platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Anchor. The next one is a little less technical, a little more fun, is the Do Better Collective. I came across this one through their Facebook group. I joined because they were looking for, or I was looking for a little bit of guidance with a case that was within my scope, but there were a few things that I hadn't worked with before, and they have a great mentoring program. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it, but you kind of create your little profile saying, okay, I'm a BCBA, I'm looking for mentorship, or you don't have to be a BCBA, but you're looking for mentorship in these areas. And then someone else created a profile that says, I am a BCBA and I am mentoring in these areas. And then you kind of get matched with someone with the skills you're looking for. So I had the opportunity to be a mentee for with someone, and then I also was a mentor for someone. So it was a really great way to grow professionally, know more people. And then they started doing a podcast, which was fantastic, because I was like, this is already a fantastic platform, and now they're adding a podcast. And I think they do like CU events and stuff. But again, they're also very broad in the topics they cover. It's very practical. You can listen to the episodes and literally go to work and say, okay, I have all these new tools, or at least my mind is now open to all these new possibilities because of the way they explain things and the topics they cover, the people they interview. It's a fantastic podcast. And this one is led by Dr. Megan Miller and Joe Smith. And you can also get CEUs through listening to the podcast, which I didn't mention for the controversial exchange, which is similar. And I think the ABA Inside Track does as well. But it's a great way to earn your CEUs while you're driving, while you're maybe cooking, without having to sit and do a full webinar or something of that source. So yeah, it's a great podcast. I really like this one.
Yeah, I love the whole like matching of mentors and mentees. That's good to know. Definitely gonna look into that. Thank you.
It's really great because I mean, the relationships that I've built through there are relationships, professional relationships that I can continue to, have. And now I go to conferences and I recognize more people because we've worked to some extent together, and it's really great, especially in this media, online social media platform life that we're living right now. It's
Yeah.
kind of create those more one-on-one relationships.
Yeah, and I love that it's more than just having a podcast for a lot of these people that have started this. Like they're building communities, and they're going beyond to just like disseminate and help us, who are in this journey of just learning more and just hungry for knowledge. And so it's pretty cool. I love these communities. I have to check out more. I wish I had more time, but I love that I have all the information. And as soon as I have a break, I'll definitely, fill my time with some of this stuff. So the next podcast I'm going to cover is Behavior Bitches. The co-hosts are Liat Sachs and Casey McDaniel, and they describe in their website, they're described as real, raw, and relatable. So this one is a fun, funky podcast to listen to. They talk about why people do the things that they do. They break things down. For people that may not be a behavior analyst. They have guest speakers, some of them within our field, some of them outside of our field. And what I really like is that throughout their discussions, they also try to teach behavior analytic concepts and principles in these like conversations about everyday stuff. So they'll pause and say, "Oh, this is what in behavior analysis we call so and so." So it's very educational in that sense as well. They do have just a disclaimer. They throw the F-bomb here and there. So we're all adults and we can handle it. But if you do listen to your podcast with your kids around, just a heads up, there are some F-bombs that are dropped in there. They have a new episode every Monday. They're very fun to listen to. You can listen to them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcast.
I'm glad you made that disclaimer because that's a good thing to point out because I do listen to podcasts with my kids around. So yes, and they repeat everything. So
Gonna start dropping the F-bomb.
the last one I have on my list is the BAPcast for short, but it's the podcast that accompanies the Behavior Analysis and Practice Journal, which I didn't know existed until a few months ago. And they are just now starting to roll out their episodes. They were in the initial stages of interviewing authors that have published in the journal. This one is a little different because they really break down, similar to the ABA Inside Track where they're breaking down the article, but they're breaking it down with the author. So they really want to get down to the nitty gritty of writing process or, just in general, the research process. I think it's something that's scary to a lot of us to go through, but they kind of break that down with the author to show you that you can create something great and publish. And then they just released their first episode this week, I believe, and they're interviewing Stephanie Peterson, who is the editor of the journal now. So just a fun episode talking about the journal. So if you haven't read this particular journal, it's a great one. There's a lot of tutorials. There's a lot of practical articles that can be implemented like right now, which is fantastic.
Awesome. I will check that out. I didn't know we had this. But
I think there's so many podcasts that I'm sure we're not covering, not even like half of them, but a lot over the last year. I feel like a lot have either come up or have become more of the part of the conversation, which is fantastic.
Yeah, they keep popping up. And when you are on like your podcast app, let's say, you can always click like more related, like or like more like this or whatever it is, and like every time I like find a new ABA podcast. I'm like, okay, I have to like listen to this one now. But yeah, there's so many of them, which is great. I think that we are seeing how useful this is, and like from even your poll, that so many people are listening to podcasts. So it's something to.
I like that there's such a variety too, because you can do the more, nitty gritty stuff, learning like very technical stuff, where you can do the more fun stuff and still learn, at the end of the day, you're still learning something, which is fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. The last podcast that we're going to talk about is Defy. It was formerly known as Reveal. And this is an all-inclusive community that was co-founded by Sarah Troutman. Some of you may be familiar with her, and Carol Ladona. They're both BCBAs. They want to empower. They want to help those, not just with their professional lives, but their personal lives as well. They do coaching, mentorship. They provide support. Their podcast is fairly new. They started more with kind of like just building this community of mentors, I want to say. And then later on, they started their podcast. They started in November 2020, and they have up to 17 episodes right now. And through their episode, they kind of just share stories of people, their struggles, how they've defied the odds, persevered through incredible circumstances, and transformed their lives. So this is one of those like inspirational episodes. They get very real, which I love. And yeah, it's fairly new. So I still have to dive in a little bit more on the topics that they cover, but that is kind of like the overall kind of thing that they have going on.
Yeah, this is another new one for me that I hadn't heard of.
Yeah,
Much to add to our listening list. Time one day.
I know it gets hard with like school and busy, but yeah. So thank you everyone for coming and listening. We will add the links to the podcast to our show notes and links to websites, so you guys can on your time just go in, navigate. Some of them have they offer CEUs like we mentioned before. Some have merchandise that you can purchase. You can support them through Patreon. So there's other stuff that they have out there other than the podcast. So we'll leave those links below, and you guys, feel free to check them out. Leave some comments, questions, suggestions, and we'll see you guys next time.